Mouthwashing is a game that seemingly came out of nowhere and exploded in popularity with plenty of memes and fan art. I learned about this game from a friend who recommended it because she liked it. So, I gave it a try. It was met with a story-rich experience full of horror and sorrow. There is no joy for the 5 members of the Tulper, as each now face the reality of the situation they are in. Situations spawn from their inability to take responsibility. One of the major themes of this game is that each of the members of the crew fails in their responsibilities in some way, which eventually leads to their downfall. Some are only a small piece in a puzzle, while others have more sweeping influence on the lives of the crew. So, let's talk about how each member fails to take responsibility. Starting with Anya is the nurse of the Tulper, responsible for monitoring the crew's physical and mental well-being. Before the crash, Anya reports to Curley that Jimmy doesn't take his psychiatric evaluation seriously, saying how he's attracted to cartoon horses and the like. She isn't ever able to convince him to take it seriously, and has hinted that this has been an ongoing problem for quite some time. Later, after the crash, Anya begins to delegate giving Curley his pain medication to Jimmy, because she feels uncomfortable with Curley's current state. Anya was close to Curley, so seeing him in this state, especially with the idea that he directed the ship into the asteroid, was very upsetting to her. It's a betrayal of her trust. However, as time goes on, we begin to see why she's seemingly not taking responsibility. Throughout the game, it is hinted that Anya is uncomfortable around Jimmy, whether it be her being startled by him before she reveals the medical cabinet, or when she seemingly has a breakdown from Jimmy yelling at her. But that uncomfortable feeling goes deeper when you look at her conversations with Curley. 2 days before the crash, Anya and Curley have a conversation about how long they have left for their delivery. Curley states it's around 230 days, which Anya immediately recognizes as being about 8 months. He then asks Curley why the medical room has a lock on the door, but the sleeping quarters don't. Reading between the lines, you can guess that something must have happened for her to be asking this type of question. And we learn the reason why when Curley later finds Anya in the cockpit. She reveals she is pregnant, that Jimmy forced himself on her. Anya is afraid of Jimmy. She worries about what Jimmy would do to her, especially if he had the gun, which is why she hides it. She also places her bedroll next to the Polly statue. When you walk by the statue, a motion detector goes off and it greets the person walking by. Anya placed her bedroll there, so if Jimmy ever tried to attack her in the middle of the night, the statue would go off. Finally, she tells Swansea about what Jimmy did. We're going to come back to this moment later, because this moment represents a huge turning point in the story, so hang tight. However, in the end, Anya cannot guarantee her own safety. The fear she felt every time that she sees Jimmy was just too much, coupled with Jimmy likely being the reason why the Polly statue was destroyed. Anya had been paranoid for months that Jimmy was going to hurt her, so she locks herself in the medical room. However, she now hears that somebody is in the vents. The most likely person in her mind is Jimmy. She freaks out and decides that she's going to handle things her way, and takes the pain medication only to reveal it's Daisuke. Doing some research, Anya took 500 milligram capsules of paracetamol, aka Tylenol. Each of the bottles she has is meant for 100 capsules. 3 bottles were open, and assuming each of these were full before they were opened, it means that she took 150 grams of paracetamol. In a situation like this, he doesn't go out immediately, but would be gone within 30 minutes. It's why I believe if you try to go into the medical wing when you need to get the mouthwash for Daisuke, it's blurred out where Anya would be, because she is still alive, but in a much worse state than Daisuke. Speaking of Daisuke, we should probably talk about him next. Daisuke is an intern on the Tulper, working directly under Swansea. He's supposed to be responsible for the overall maintenance of the Tulper, but seems to get stuck in foam instead and needs saving from the rest of the crew. Daisuke is only here because his parents found him this job. Daisuke was an aimless adult without a clear future. Worried about him, his parents essentially forced him to take this internship, thinking he would benefit from a stricter environment. Daisuke tries hard to be liked by the other members of the crew, especially with Swansea, his direct superior, and often tries to exceed expectations before it bites him in the end, such as when he gets stuck in the foam in the utility room. After the crash, Daisuke follows Swansea's lead and begins drinking the mouthwash, tries to maintain high spirits. However, this leads to others taking advantage of him. When Anya locks herself in the medical wing, Daisuke immediately runs to Jimmy for help, rather than trying to fix the problem himself. When it comes time to make the cocktail for Swansea, you talk to Daisuke. He says this feels like a heist movie, or describes how he could see himself drinking one of those cocktails at the beach, showing he's not really taking this seriously. Daisuke does not ever push back against what anyone else says, and if he does, it's half-hearted. It's why he's easily manipulated into going into the vent in utility. Daisuke's desire to impress Swansea and save the day leads to the irresponsible decision to ignore Swansea's warning prior to the crash, the obvious sparks coming from the vent in favor of Jimmy's manipulation. Daisuke's inability to act like a responsible adult ultimately leads to him acting like a child, seeking the approval of his parents. Swansea was the mechanic of the crew, and in charge of Daisuke. Swansea comes off as a very strict and mean person, but is actually much kinder than at first glance. Swansea is a former alcoholic, and had been sober now for over a decade, and got his life together. There was still something missing despite becoming a good man, as he says. When the Tulper crashes and the crew discovers they have been hauling mouthwash, Swansea breaks his sobriety and is almost never sober since. In Swansea's mind, what's left for him to care about? His main job, the maintenance of the Tulper, is now defunct, especially since he was laid off shortly before the crash. In his mind, there's nothing left for him to be responsible for. Him taking responsibility for his life led him to ending up in a broken space hauler with no way to contact anyone for help. But there was one thing left for Swansea. Swansea discovered that the utility room had one functional cryopod remaining. This meant that at least one of the crew could be saved. Swansea chose to save Daisuke. When Swansea sees Daisuke, he sees a chance to guide Daisuke away from the path that Swansea was on. Swansea had spent decades with the Pony Express, and all left him was older, uglier, and meaner. Swansea never wanted Daisuke to end up like him. So if he could save Daisuke, it would make the remainder of his life worth it. But Swansea takes on another role during the crew's slow demise. He begins to take on a protector role. Told you we were going to come back to this. When Swansea and Anya were talking in the cockpit about what Jimmy did to Anya, the next time we see Swansea, he is holding an axe. This is the axe that Curley, the prior captain, entrusted to Swansea. With this axe, he hopes to protect the crew from Jimmy. Swansea's fatal flaw would be his alcoholism. When Swansea drank the cocktail, it would mean that he could not be responsible for the safety of Daisuke, allowing Jimmy to manipulate him. When he eventually wakes up, damage had been done. Swansea had to confront his failures. Jimmy can be seen as the main antagonist of the story. He takes on the role of acting captain of the Tulper after the crash. Quickly realizes that responsibility is a heavy thing. Prior to the crash, Jimmy expressed his envy of Curley, of how he was able to climb up the ladder while Jimmy was stuck at the bottom rung. Everyone likes Curley and admires his leadership ability, and Jimmy wants it. But he wants it for the power, not realizing that being captain means being responsible for everyone else as well. Jimmy is the least responsible person on the crew. He often acts out from the fear of the responsibility he faces. When Anya reveals she is pregnant, instead of taking responsibility for his actions, he decides he would rather crash into an asteroid. When Jimmy finds Anya and Swansea chatting in the cockpit, he begins to get angry while giving Curley his medicine, because he believes he's been exposed. Jimmy also believes everyone else is irresponsible too, until he eventually realizes that not everyone is nearly as selfish as him. This is best highlighted with his final interaction with Swansea. Jimmy believes that Swansea hid the pod so he could use it for himself, only to learn that Swansea was going to let Daisuke use it. Jimmy couldn't fathom that another person would not act in their own self-interest. So Jimmy attempts to show that he can act selfless too, by chopping off Curly's leg and feeding it to him before shoving him in a cryopod. Yeah, very selfish. Even this interaction is a selfish act from Jimmy, as seen when he talks to Curly while he's on fire. He wants to be viewed as a hero, someone who managed to save someone on the crew. So, he saves Curly, and decides to escape responsibility once more. Curly is an interesting case of responsibility. Each and every member of the crew respects him greatly, even Jimmy, if only for the power that he holds. Curly is seen as someone trustworthy and everyone can rely on him. But Curly's quick to give up if it requires him to put in a lot of effort. In the conversation Anya and Curly have 2 days before the crash, Anya mentions a dead pixel on the screen and tries to point it out to Curly, only for Curly to give up looking for it when it's too difficult to find. When Curly confronts Jimmy, Curly defaults to trying to reassure Jimmy that everything's going to be okay, tries to protect him. But Jimmy says something that I think perfectly encapsulates Curly's mentality. You're standing at the top, feet in cement, and get it now, right? Curly responds, right. Curly is supposed to be responsible for the crew, the ship, and everything that happens here. However, that responsibility is only for whatever is within arm's reach. The second he needs to take more proper action, he gives up and lets things happen. Even when Jimmy tells him that they would be better off if the Tulper disappeared in a tragedy, Curly can only stand there while Jimmy redirects the ship straight into the asteroid. Curly's new appearance leaves him firmly in that cement. Unable to move on his own, he needed to be fed his pain medication. Forced to listen to Anya and Jimmy, potentially others, voice their regrets and their anger at their situation. As the crew begins to bite the dust, Curly is left on the bed, forced to watch everything unfold. His feet, cement, stubs, and it doesn't have feet anymore. And when Jimmy finally pulls the gun out of the case, all Curly can do is laugh, as everything he was responsible for slips away from him. With nothing left, Curly is taken to the cryopod, forced to sit there in his cement. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, hit the like button. Leave a comment if you think I missed something. Hit the subscribe button. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.